is Sydney, and I am with Trepevi Smith, and we are helping the City of Santa Paula with their outreach efforts on this district formation process. With me here tonight from my team is Kylie in the back over there, and she will be writing all of your great input on this whiteboard so we can have it for the record and make sure that we take that into consideration. Also with me tonight is Daniel from National Demographics Corporation, and he is the city's professional demographer for this process. So just to cover today's goals, first and foremost, you will have a chance to learn from the experts. So Dr. Phillips here is your guide to all things district formation. So utilize him to the best of your ability. He's here to answer all of your questions. And this is also an opportunity for the experts to learn from you. So you are the experts in your neighborhoods and community, and we want to make sure that we're taking that input and applying it to when we're drawing these maps. Daniel will also provide mapping tools overview, so you'll have a chance to learn how to use the online maps, and I see that some of you already have your paper maps, which is great. So thank you for coming very prepared. And lastly, we want to make sure that you leave feeling empowered to give effective feedback, so we want to make sure that you have all of the tools and resources that you need to participate in this process. So just a couple notes on why you should care. So obviously you're all here because you are invested in this process, and thank you for being here tonight. But democracy just simply works better when we have a lot of participation, so please encourage your neighbors to also come out and participate. You are also, as I mentioned, the experts in your community, and we want to hear from you. Lastly, this is a once-in-a-decade opportunity, so once we finish this process, it won't necessarily be a decade since we are starting after the 2020 census, thank you. But following that, the redistricting process happens after every census, every 10 years. So just to go over today's schedule, we did start a little late, but we're hoping to promptly end at 7:30. We respect your time, and we thank you for being here tonight. Daniel is going to go over the process rules and goals. He's also going to provide that mapping tool demonstration that I was referring to earlier. And then we'll get your input on your neighborhoods and communities of interest that we want to make sure that we respect throughout this process. And then we'll also go over the next steps and how we can stay involved in this. With that, I'll pass it to Daniel.
Thank you, Sydney, and good evening, everybody. Good to be with you. And what I'm going to do for the rest of the presentation is give some basic information that will hopefully help you as you try to draw these maps that would have the best chance of being accepted eventually by the City Council as being both legally acceptable and just the best map for the city. And so when it comes to legal criteria, it's important to note that we have quite an extensive list of criteria that come from both federal and state law that you would be advised to follow as you are drawing your maps, because only a legally acceptable map can be ultimately approved by the City Council. So the first bracket of law, the federal laws, include the mandate that the districts have equal numbers of people in each. Now, they don't have to be exactly equal. There is some wiggle room, and I'll get into that later, what exactly that wiggle room is, but that's an important consideration. Next is the Federal Voting Rights Act, and the idea there is to not draw districts in a way that would prevent members of a protected class from being able to elect candidates of their choice. And in the city of Santa Paula, a protected class would be a group of people who are historically marginalized or discriminated against because of their race, ethnicity, or language. And so the idea there is to not draw a map in a way that would intentionally discriminate against such a group. But on the flip side, we don't want to make race or ethnicity the only or main consideration when drawing these districts. So we have other criteria which come from the state, and that includes that the districts should be geographically contiguous, which means they should just be one piece each, not disconnected pieces. So you want to draw districts that are completely connected, contiguous. Number 2 is to avoid dividing neighborhoods and communities of interest. which are socioeconomic geographic areas that should be kept together. And in the next few slides, I'll get into a little bit more what those neighborhoods and communities of interest might look like. Number 3 is to have districts with easily identifiable boundaries. So this might be a river or a railroad or a major street, something that people can easily recognize on the ground and conceive of that as a sensible boundary. And number 4 is to draw districts that are compact in that they do not bypass one group of people to get to a more distant group of people. So you'll notice in this list of state criteria, it's a numbered order, 1, 2, 3, 4. That means that the state recognizes it may not be possible to adhere to all of those criteria, and so it actually prioritizes them. So if you had to make trade-offs, you want to prioritize contiguity first and foremost, then neighborhoods, then identifiable boundaries, and lastly, compactness. The final group, this group of criteria actually does not come from state or federal law. It's just something that you may want to consider. One is to respect voters' choices or continuity in office, and that would be to adhere to try to be mindful of where the incumbent council members might live in order to give each incumbent the opportunity to run for re-election in their own district. And the idea there is to leave it to the voters to decide whether each of these incumbents has earned re-election. When it comes to the citizen map drawing process, we tend to de-emphasize this, first because council members' addresses aren't as readily available, and also because we want to put the focus on the actual legal criteria. So it may be something you might want to consider, but it's certainly not mandatory or required. The other thing is that we have the issue of future population growth. And the idea there is there's going to be certain areas of the city where you might have an influx of population growth, either because of a new housing development or something along those lines. And so for that, you may want to draw the district boundaries in such a way where the district where that growth is taking place is actually intentionally underpopulated in order to leave room for that district to catch up in population over the course of the decade. So you don't want to underpopulate it too much because we have to stay true to the equal population requirement, which is the very first of the federal requirements. But within the wiggle room that's allowable, you can try to draw a district where that population growth has some time to catch up. So let me get into the demographics of the city. You can see here that the total population is just under 31,000. And we base this off of the 2020 census. And we are legally required to base it off the 2020 census. We realize that there's been growth that has taken place, especially on the eastern side of the city, since the census was released, but that is the legal benchmark. And so ultimately in 2030, when you redistrict, the numbers will be different, and you'll have that 2030 census will account for that growth that has taken place on the eastern side of the city. But in the meantime, we have to stick with the 2020 numbers, which is 30,772. Adjusted means that we include those who are incarcerated, whose last residential address was Santa Paula. That's a legal requirement. We have to use that number. So with that as our total figure for the city, we then divide it by 5, because there's going to be 5 city council districts for each of the city council members. and that gives us approximately 6,150 people. So that is our benchmark for the population of each of those districts. I mentioned that there was wiggle room that is allowable, and that wiggle room is 10% of that 6,150 figure. So there can be a difference of 615 people between the most populated district and the least populated district. The rest of the table, you'll see a racial ethnic breakdown of both the total population, which includes children and non-citizens, as well as the citizen voting age population, which only focuses on those who are eligible to vote. And you'll see that's a much smaller fraction of the city's population, just over 16,000. And the racial ethnic breakdown is slightly different for that group of people than the total population. And the reason we give those figures is because when it comes to adhering to the Federal Voting Rights Act, the courts have ruled that it's the citizen voting age population that we need to be mindful of. So I mentioned that the Federal Voting Rights Act, that is in regard to protected classes, and in the city of Santa Paula, the Latino Hispanic population is the main protected class. And you can see that they are heavily concentrated throughout the city, especially in the central part. The legend for the colors is in the top left, so you'll see that the warmer colors indicate higher percentages. So you'll see where the concentrations are for that group. There are no significant concentrations of other protected classes in the city. So when it comes to defining neighborhoods, we like to ask two questions. First, what are the neighborhoods that we should be aware of? And second, what are their geographic boundaries? So examples of some features that might define a neighborhood boundary include natural dividing lines like highways or major roads, rivers, canals, areas around parks or schools, and other neighborhood landmarks. So one of the goals of tonight is to get that testimony about what the neighborhoods are and what their boundaries look like. But in the absence of that testimony, we do have planning records and other similar documents that may provide definition, such as land use or zoning, and you can see that in this map it shows the parts of the city that are designated commercial versus residential, different types of density of residential, and it also shows the limits of downtown and industrial areas. This map shows what is called a property-based improvement district, which might be considered a very narrow definition of downtown. This is at the intersection of Main and 10th. We also have elementary school attendance areas, which might be relevant for defining neighborhoods. Now, going beyond neighborhoods, we have this additional term, this community of interest category. And again, we like to ask two questions. First, what defines your community? And second, would this community benefit from being included within a single district for purposes of its effective and fair representation? So to answer the first question, we are referring to a geographic area that is kind of united by some shared issue or characteristic, usually a social or economic interest that is impacted by city policies. So it will be helpful to know if such a community exists, and secondly, would it benefit from being included within a single district? The law only requires that it be in a single district if it would actually benefit from being in a single district. We can't imagine circumstances where such a community would benefit more from having multiple representatives. So that's another reason why we're gathered here today, is to hear that sort of testimony. Would there be a community that would benefit from being in one district, or are there communities that would benefit more from multiple? So some potential examples of communities of interest based on socioeconomic interests could be renters. Renters are concentrated in the center of the city, so you'll see that they are this the orange and red colors are the highest concentrations of renters. And those who live in apartments are also tend to be more concentrated in the center of the city. We also can look at income levels. So here the warmer colors indicate higher income levels while the cooler colors are lower. So lower earners would be concentrated in the center of the city. And when it comes to education level, in this case, those who have graduated high school, we also see a similar pattern with those who did not graduate high school being more commonly found in the center of the city. In this case, we have Spanish speakers, those who speak Spanish at home. They are more concentrated in the center of the city, less so toward the outskirts. But similarly, we have those who have a child at home. They are more concentrated in the northern center part of the city. So these are just examples. They're not meant to be. They're meant to stir your thoughts about what the possible communities of interest might look like. So that leads us to the mapping tools. So we have different tools for different purposes, and all of them can be found at drawsantapaula.org. And so we are highlighting 3 here tonight. The first is the paper participation kit, where you can draw your own districts on a simple paper map. So you'll see here we have a map of the city of Santa Paula, and it's clearly labeled here that we want to be drawing 5 districts with this map. Now, the city itself is broken up into what are called population units. So we try to come up with a scale for these population units where they're not too big but not too small. If they're too big, they're not useful for making districts, but if they're too small, it won't be legible. So this is the compromise we get at. So these population units are usually a group of blocks, maybe 5 or 6, and you can see there's a population total for each of these units, and that's the number that is superimposed on each of these units. And so that's your guide to figuring out how many people to put into each of these districts. So, like I said, with 6,150 as the barometer, you have a wiggle room of 615, a difference between the largest and smallest. So what you can do is take a pen, and I think what is probably the most helpful, at least for me, is to write numbers for certain districts that you want a population unit to be included in. So let's say for this big population unit here that has 191 people, at least according to the census, maybe I want that to be in District 1, so I just write a 1 next to it. And then I keep going, write 1s until I feel like, that's a pretty good district. Now you can take your calculator and add up the numbers to see if you get to the right amount of people. And you may find that you still need to add more population units to get to the right number, or take away some. And so once you figure out that you've had enough people, then you can essentially draw in the boundary and make sure it's a nice thick black boundary, or you could color it even. But the idea is it can be easy to miscalculate if you aren't careful about making sure that you get all the population units that you want into that district. So just make sure, maybe use a pencil and then cross it out once you have added to your calculation. So that is probably the simplest method for drawing a district using the paper mapping tool. So once you're finished, you can write your name and your contact information, and then you can submit this at City Hall, or you can just take a picture of it and send it into the email address, which is districting@spcity.org. And we've already received one of these already, so feel free to do that whenever you want to submit it. And you can submit multiple if you so choose. So that is the first of the tools. The second is actually I'm going to briefly touch on the third before getting into the second, because the second will take a little bit more time to explain. The third is an interactive review map where you can explore the city's demographics and review draft maps once they are posted. Draft maps won't be posted until approximately a week before the city council meeting which will consider the draft maps. That will be in January. But in the meantime, you can go to this, let's see. So if you go to, I need to exit out of the So if you go to drawsantapaula.org, you will be taken to a welcome page. If you go to the Draw a Map page or tab, it will take you to this page where you can access the paper mapping tools, both in English and in Spanish, at these links here. So you can see what that looks like. It just brings you to a PDF. The interactive review map is at the bottom here, and if you click on that, it'll take you to this platform where if you zoom in, you can see the boundaries of the city in red, and you can display a lot of the demographics that I already showed in previous slides, but this way you can actually see for yourself where the different concentrations are, so that maybe when you're drawing your own map using either the paper map or the online tool, you can use this as a reference tool. And then, like I said, eventually the draft maps that are submitted will be processed and posted here. So you can zoom in by clicking the plus or the minus. You can pan by clicking and dragging. And you can display different layers by checking and unchecking these boxes to the right here. And you can even display multiple at once if you so choose. If you want to see the legend, go to the top left here, and it will show you what the colors signify. So that is the interactive review map. And then we have the online mapping tool, which comes from Dave's Redistricting app, or DRA. So let me demonstrate how you could use that tool. So if you go to the website, you will see that there's a user guide, as well as a tutorial video that you can click on, but I will demonstrate how to use it right now. So the important thing is you first have to go to daysredistricting.org, and you have to sign into your account, and if you don't have an account, you have to create one. So I already have an account. If you go to the top right here, you can see my account, and so that step is already done, but you'll have to make an account if you don't have one. But assuming you do have an account, then you will have access to the tool. So to access the tool, all you have to do is click this link here, which is the mapping template. So if you click that link, which is on the drawsantapaula.org website, it might take a few seconds to load and zoom in to the city, but eventually does so. And you will be able to see the outline of the city of Santa Paula. And there we have it. And so this is a blank template. There's no districts filled in. So what you have to do in order to make your own districts is to click this paintbrush tool. And it says make editable copy of this map. And if you click on that, it says you can make an editable copy of this map. And you click yes. So having done that, I am now taken to the list of maps that I have created in the past. And it will eventually pop up at the top of the list as copy of Santa Paula blank template. So what you can do then is check that box next to that name and click edit. And when you do that, it will take you to the city of Santa Paula. And this is your own copy that has your own link that you can share with others and with the city. So I would advise that you make your own unique title for the map by clicking the title up here. So I'm going to call it Daniel's Test Map and click submit. So now I'm ready to go. And so if you go over here, you will see that you have 5 districts. District 1 in red, District 2 in blue, District 3 in green, District 4 in teal, and District 5 in orange. So that is, if you want to do a certain district, you have to make it your target. So right now, my target is District 1. So Cindy, do you think we could move the slide projector a little bit further back so that it takes up more of the screen, if you please? Thank you. Okay, thanks, yeah. So now we have, we've made sure that District 1 is our target, and now we're going to actually draw in a district. And so in order to do that, you click Paint Map Features, this paintbrush icon. And you can see that the default area for drawing districts is the precinct. We would recommend using the block level because that will give you more resolution. And that is the key benefit or advantage of this tool as opposed to the paper mapping tool, because the paper mapping tool locks you into those population units that we drew. This tool allows you to have ultimate flexibility. You just have the very small census blocks as your building blocks in a sense.
May I
So,
ask a question?
yes.
So if you hover over the far right area, the population says 423.
Yes.
And then on the map, there's 191, and maybe if you add 137 and 102, but I can't get to the same number.
Yeah, so if you look here, it's showing the block group. And so what you have to do is you hover your cursor over the area that you want to fill in or paint, and you click that area. And when you click it, well, first I'm going to demonstrate how to zoom in and out. So again, you use the plus icon and the minus icon to zoom in and zoom out. Then you have the pan in order to actually move around the city. You just click and drag. So that leads me to the actual brush tool. So we have block as the area that we're selecting, and then we click in order to add a block to District 1. Okay, it's not cooperating right now. It's unfortunate. Okay, there we go. So I clicked, and what it did was shatter the precinct into all the different blocks that make up that precinct. So you'll see that now you have much smaller units to work with, and you have a lot more flexibility as far as the districts that you can draw. So now that I've shattered the precinct into different blocks with that first click, then I can click again in order to add the blocks to District 1, the red district. So you would do it like this. You could click individual blocks, or you could click and drag in order to do a bunch without having to keep clicking a bunch. So with this block over here, when you hover over it, you see to the right that it has 423, but that's the whole precinct. So if you click in there, you can see that now that I've shattered it into different blocks, there are only 191 people that live in this block. But again, this is based on 2020 census numbers that are almost certainly not accurate anymore, but that's what we're legally required to utilize. So I add that to District 1, and it gives me the whole northeastern corner of the city. But usually the blocks are much smaller, especially when you get toward the downtown area, and it's basically block by block, and you can click and drag. And as you click and drag, you'll see at the top left the number of people that have been added to your district. And you can see that number is 4,793. And you can see next to it the deviation from the target population. It's 1,361 people too small. So you need to add more people in order to have a district that is the proper size, or the proper population. So you can click the pen tool and drag up, and maybe you might want to include this northernmost part of the city, in which case you can go back to the brush tool. And if you just want to get the whole precinct, click the precinct option for the area that you select. And when you hover over that precinct, it will add the entire precinct to your district. And now you see that our population is much closer to the ideal. It's just 590 people too small. So perhaps if you want to round out the district, you could go back to the block option, click in here, and get these last few pieces. Now I do want to point out, if you zoom in and pan up here, if I stopped my district here, I would be cutting off this piece of the city from the rest of its district. And that would count as not being contiguous. So in order to adhere to the contiguity requirement, you would want to add these blocks into District 1 as well. So I think there is a little bit of a lag effect happening here, just maybe the internet connection or whatnot, but hopefully you get the idea that once you switch back to the paint icon and make sure you have blocks selected, then you would just need to click, and eventually it will shatter, and you can add more blocks to that red district, District 1. So when you feel like you have a district that is up here by selecting the blue district, blue, number 2. And you would use the same procedure where you select different blocks and shadow them. So now I'm going to try to go back to the red district and fill this in to make it contiguous. So now my red district is just 195 people too short, which is probably close enough to be considered equal population. So then you just want to make your target district 2 again and keep filling that in, and eventually you fill in all 5 districts. So up here, you'll see the statistics button, and if you click that, you can see how each of your districts looks as far as the criteria are concerned, especially the population criterion. And you can see that District 1 is just 3.17%, so it's looking pretty good. We recommend you keep it under 5% so that the total deviation is 10%. But you can see, since I haven't filled in any of the other districts, they are just 0 people and they're 100% off. So hopefully once you have filled in all the districts, you will get a total deviation that is less than 10%, which will show up right here and right here. So once you feel that you have, you're satisfied with your map and you're ready to submit it, you're going to want to return to your list of maps, which is this icon here, to the right of the title. And you click that, and you will then select your map by checking the box next to it. And you want to make sure that you publish it so that others can access it. So to do that, you click publish, and you verify your email, and then you click publish. And so once you do that, then you can share your selected map by clicking this share icon, which is right here next to the edit, and that will give you the link for that URL that you can then share with the city. So you can copy that link and then write an email and send your map to District Dean at spcity.org. And that's how days redistricting map works. So the key thing is you got to make sure to publish it first, because otherwise when staff click on that link, they won't be able to do anything because it hasn't been published. So publish, then share, and then you're good to go. So I'm happy to answer more questions about that in the Q&A time, but I'm just going to return briefly to the slideshow. And now we have question and answer time, so perfect time. Okay, so feel free to, I believe we have a microphone that we're passing around.
So if you have a question, if you can come up, and then we'll give the microphone to you.
Yeah, so if you have a question, please come up and this microphone.
I just had a question. I came in a little bit late, so I don't know if you showed various configurations, various colored versions, or was this the only one you showed? With the red as number 1 and the blue as District 2?
Yes. So the way that the district, or the days redistricting map works is they have their default colors. So District 1 is always red, District 2 is always blue. So if you're really particular about the colors for your districts, we recommend using the paper map, and you can color it as you so choose.
I'm not concerned with the colors, just wondering if you gave different examples. So anybody who's looking at this, they're going to think this is where you start with the way you just drew it, versus, no, there are various configurations.
Oh, yes.
That's my point.
Oh, yes. Yeah, so what I did was just for demonstration purposes. So that was, I just happened to start in that corner of the city. You can draw your map, draw your districts, however you so choose. I was just showing how the tools work so that you can see what it might look like.
And my second question, going up Ojai Road in the configuration that you gave, there was a little break, and that's why you added the red at the very top. Is that little break, because there is one street up Ojai Road, it's called April Lane, one street, within all of the rest is city boundaries, but April Lane is county. Was that the space, do you know, if we could click on it, maybe, if that was April Lane? And is one street significant enough to say that the area is not contiguous? It's a very small cul-de-sac, that's what I'm asking.
Is this the street you're referring to? Yeah, so it's considered county land, so it means that, here's April Lane, it's right here. So the neighborhood around April Lane is cut off from the rest of the area west of North Ojai Road by this county land. So it would be considered an island, and it has to be connected to the rest of the city in some way. So if you drew District 2 so that it kept going up and getting the west side of that road, that would be considered non-contiguous because you judge contiguity by actual city territory. Let me say that in the microphone. When it comes to contiguity, you judge contiguity by actual city territory. So, yeah.
But you put April Lane as city territory.
It is city territory, yes.
April Lane is not part of the city, it's county. Somebody can correct me, maybe there's.
I know, yeah, I know the orchard south of there is unincorporated, which is, I think, that big white area,
Okay, yeah,
or blank area.
maybe it did change, Kate. I know that they can't, I always thought that they could not vote in city elections if they lived on that cul-de-sac. Paul Reyes lives there, his brother lives there, that's kind of friends of mine that I know live there. But it could have changed, so we should check on that, that's a good idea.
Two things. One is, I'm pretty good with computers, but that is a really challenging exercise, and I'm not sure what level of participation you'll get from any community with that. So, that's a challenge. And second, do you mind, for everyone's here, kind of starting at the way beginning, and letting us know why we're here and how we got here? I think it'd be helpful.
Yes, ma'am. So in previous meetings with the city council, these were considered official public hearings on district elections. We went through the background for why the city has decided to initiate this process of switching to district elections. And the reason is there's this legislation that was passed by the state called the California Voting Rights Act. And this legislation has made it so that jurisdictions, no matter their size, are under legal threat of being for racially polarized voting if they continue to remain in at-large elections. And so, in order to escape that legal liability, cities, not just cities, counties, special districts, school districts, are across the state transitioning to district elections that ensure that there is just a district where a city council member has to live in that district and they can only be elected by residents of that district. Because that system, the district election system, is considered by that legislation, the CVRA, the California Voting Rights Act, as the only legally safe system for respecting voting rights, as far as the state has decided. So, in order to make sure that the city of Santa Paula is in compliance with that legislation, they have elected to go to this district election system.
Yes, along the lines with that question, so I'm glad she asked. I moved here about 2.5 years ago, and I did some research on the city of Santa Paula, and I don't recall reading anything or any problems with voting violations or any challenges like that. And I just heard you say that the potential or the possibility or to avoid it. So am I hearing correctly that Santa Paula has never had problems with that? We haven't had any kind of complaints, or there's nothing documented that substantiates that we have been violating people's voting rights? Is that what I'm hearing? Because I've been reading the paper and online about all this, and I'm here, I'm engaged as a community member because I want to do wherever the city's going to go. I want to understand, I want to be educated. But like Kate just asked, how did we get here? And the only thing that I have ever read were things in the newspaper, that there was a group, there was a letter going to the city, and here we are. And I thought, well, what happened in between? Was there information? Was there research that substantiated that we were flawed in our voting process? Do you have any knowledge about that? Or is it just California that is going this way, period? And I have a question regarding the map. Thank you.
Yeah, so this is a statewide phenomenon that is impacting hundreds of jurisdictions across the state. And the thing is, this legislation makes it very, very easy for any jurisdiction to be found liable for racially polarized voting. If there can be shown that there is any discrepancy in election votes between one racial or ethnic group and another, then that there is the potential for racially polarized voting. And so the city wants to make sure that they are not vulnerable to be found for racially polarized voting, and so they are moving to the system to make sure that they're in compliance. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, if I might jump in. Jonathan Royce with the City of Santa Paula. So I just wanted to share, to answer your question directly related to why we're here this evening, and City Manager Singer can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe back in April of 2022 or so, thereabouts, we received a letter actually from a law firm, from Mr. Dominguez, on behalf of Latino Town Hall and members, representing members of our population, our constituency, that alleged that there is polarized voting in Santa Paula, and basically putting the city on notice that if we did not move forward with this process, we would face legal litigation. So council took that information under advisement. They met in session, and in order to meet the mandates, and Daniel can speak to that earlier, but I believe we had a 45-day turnaround time on that one. In order to avoid potential litigation, the city and council had to act quickly and basically adopted a resolution saying that we would move forward with the districting process.
So back to my original question, this allegation was made, but Was there any substantiation to that allegation? Did they give an example that Santa Paula is violating number one, number two, number three? They just said.
It was an allegation
Just an accusation that.
an allegation that there's polarized voting in Santa
But they
Paula.
didn't say
So
how
they
or when.
don't, the way they, and correct me if I'm wrong, the way the statute is set up right now, you don't really have to come forward and prove with evidence until you actually pursue a legal actual lawsuit. And by the time you actually get to a lawsuit,
Yeah.
you know, that could put the city on hook for, you know, a lot of liability and a lot of expenses. So council taking those things into consideration, thought the best move forward is to mitigate the amount of exposure to the cities to move forward with the districting process.
Okay.
And so we immediately partnered with the NDC, our public relations firm, and we've gone down that process.
So it sounds like city council did what is in the best interest of our community.
Correct.
It's like, just go ahead and just do and move forward in this. Okay,
Right.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Can you just clarify something? I'm running for city council. Say I live in area 1. Only people in area 1 can vote for me? What if I have friends in area 3, 4, 5, and 6 that want to vote for me? They can't? That's insane.
No. So the current system we have right now is general elections at large. So those people could vote from anywhere. In this particular system, when you're in a district system, you would have to be elected by those roughly 6,500 or so constituents that represent your district.
But just to be clear, this won't take effect until 2024.
Thank you,
Correct.
because I'm going all over Santa Paula, telling people to vote for Judy Clement.
Well, right now,
Wasting time.
right, yeah.
May I correct something, because I think you gave inaccurate information. So the letter did not come from Latino Town Hall, so that's inaccurate. And there has been a U.S. Department of Justice lawsuit that was filed in 2002. So you can find this, if you Google it. 2002, it was settled by the city of Santa Paula. There was an admission by the city of Santa Paula after an exhaustive research of every city council, every school board election in the history of Santa Paula. The U.S. Department of Justice determined that voting had been racially polarized. But at that time, this California law that the demographer mentioned was not in place. So that went to a vote of the people at that time. This was 21 years ago. It was a controversial issue at the time. That measure failed. People didn't understand it. So now California law has changed, and so that's why we're in the situation we're in. It is a remedy to correct racially polarized voting. So there was no fraud, like you hear in the news nationally, that we're aware of, that I'm aware of anyway. But it did remedy what was found in an exhaustive investigation by the U.S. Department of Justice. The city did admit it in the settlement, and that was in 2002.
We'll have to do the research again because I did not find anything.
Okay. Looks like we have another question.
So, I have a question about the process. At one time, we're talking about contiguous. We're talking about numbers. And then we talked about rental areas. We talked about education areas, economic development areas. So, how are we going to coincide those two issues together? Is there going to be more emphasis on one or on the other? And then my second comment has to do with Ojai, who is experiencing some difficulties right now, as I understand. Do we look at other cities that are having some difficulties that have been put in this process? And are those taken into consideration?
I'll answer your second question first, and then turn to your first. So you're welcome to look anywhere you'd like for inspiration for drawing your districts. If you see another city that did districts and you thought maybe the process they took or the way they did it wasn't the best, you can try something different. here in your city. With your first question, you asked about all these criteria that we have to consider. What are more important than others? And I returned to this slide which lays all of them out. And the first thing to note is that the third column is completely optional, and you may not want to consider it at all. It's the first and second columns that are legally required. The federal law, the red column, you might consider the first to take into account, and so the number one item there is equal population. And so that's why we put on these paper maps and elsewhere the important number for population, which is 6,150, with no more than a 615 difference between the largest and smallest. So it doesn't have to be exactly 6,150, but that's kind of the ideal, the goal figure. And then the Federal Voting Rights Act and no racial gerrymandering, those are the other federal requirements. The idea there, and frankly, in order to make sure that you're good with those two, is you don't really need to. You don't want to do anything where you make race or ethnicity your only or main factor, either in a positive way or a negative way. A negative way would be discriminatory, where you are intentionally trying to discriminate against a certain group. That would violate the Federal Voting Rights Act. But you don't want to do it in such a positive way that you are ignoring all the other factors. And so that's where the state criteria comes along. And you see with the state criteria, it's a ranking. So the number one state criterion is to have districts that are contiguous. So all else being equal, that's your first priority. And then number two is to avoid dividing neighborhoods and communities of interest, which is why we're going to get into the neighborhoods and communities of interest and get your feedback on them. Third is to have easily identifiable boundaries, and fourth is to have compact districts. So it may end up where you have pretty non-compact districts, but you did so in order to ensure equal population and to avoid dividing neighborhoods and to have contiguous districts. That can be fine. So you will just want to make sure that you emphasize the higher priority criteria to the extent possible.
Can the downtown be a district? That's the question.
Can downtown be a district? You can certainly draw one if you feel that would be the best way to do it. There could be an argument that downtown is a community of interest that would be best represented by just one council member. There can be an alternative argument that it is an area that would be better represented by multiple council members, in which case it would be best to split it among different districts. But you also want to be mindful of the socioeconomic characteristics of the city, perhaps the renter concentrations or the income concentrations, and if it's important to you that renters have representation in multiple districts, then you'll want to try to ensure that by referring to their interactive review map and looking at where the renters are and trying to draw districts that get a piece of each. Or if you think renters are better represented in just one or two districts, draw it that way. But again, that's one of the reasons why we're here tonight, is to get that feedback. Would renters be better represented in one district or multiple? The reason I'm bringing up renters is that it's very, as you can see, it's pretty spatially correlated with downtown. So if you make downtown one district, you're essentially making a very heavily renter district, which may or may not be a good idea. So hopefully that answers your question.
We need a little help with the map if nobody else has another question.
Anyone else have any questions?
As a general law city, are we limited to 5 council members?
So my understanding is that you have a city council of 5, and that is the way your city charter is set up. And so the way that the city council has decided to do it is to maintain the current system whereby the mayor is rotated among the council members every, is it 1 year or 2 years? 1 year. And then, so that would mean that you have 5 city council districts for each city council member. So I don't, I think maybe your city manager can speak to this, but my understanding is you're gonna stick with 5 members.
Thank you, Daniel. Dan Singer, City Manager. So, good question. There are certain provisions for general law cities like Santa Paula that in order for the council to change, they would have to actually go to a vote of the people. So if they wanted to go to 7 council members, or they wanted to have term limits for council members, or they wanted to go to a strong mayor system, they could initiate that process just like a citizens organization could, either through a petition process or solicitation of the council. But the council can't make those determinations by themselves. So it would have to be placed on a ballot, which would have to be general election, which would be 2024.
Second question then, is it possible to have a hybrid system? I know in some states they allow some council members to be elected by district and some at large. Is that permitted under California law? Obviously, our current rules wouldn't allow it, but since we would be voting on going to districts, we could vote on something new in that respect.
Yes, so you recall I was referring to the California Voting Rights Act. And under the California Voting Rights Act, the only election system that is safe from liability for racially polarized voting is the district election system, whereby a council member has to live in a certain area and they can only be voted on by residents of that area, that district. And the only at-large position that you can have is the mayoral position. But the Santa Paula has decided to forego the at-large mayor and maintain the rotational system.
So I'll just add to that, as with your earlier question, if there was an interest to go to, let's say, directly elected mayor, which would be at large, that would have to be brought to the voters. The districting process doesn't go to the voters. So the districting process gets approved by the city council under the California Voter Right Act obligations. There's a set of rules, and they'll be making that determination around February or March, selecting the districts. It will not go to a vote. There are communities, well, I don't think in California the council could even ask the people to vote on it, right? Because it's already trumped by state law. So.
Yeah, we'll take one more question and then we'll move on to public input. Dan, did you want to share?
I figured out the map, thank you.
Yes.
So what happens when we have established our districts and we're in our first election? What happens if we have no candidate from a district?
So the question was, what happens when you transition to district elections? So the first thing to point out is that this election, the city council election for this November, is going to be completely at large, as past elections have been. Then in 2024, there will be the transition will begin, whereby the 2 or 3 of the council members will be elected by district. And then the other council members will still be at large because they would have been elected in this year, 2022. Then when you get to 2026, those terms expire and then they are voted on through the district system. And then the entire city council will be district representatives. So the question is, what happens when there is a situation where there is no one running in a certain district? In that case, the city council would need to appoint someone who lives in that district, and then they would serve out that term.
All right, thank you for all of those great questions. Now it is your turn to provide some feedback for us that we can all take into consideration as we're drawing these new maps. So what we want to hear from you is who is part of your community, what are some meaningful places your community recognizes or gathers at, and all of the rest of these questions are here to help prompt some inspiration for you. So Kylie will be writing down all of your input that you give, and that way we can all take this into consideration. Does anyone have any input they want to share on their neighborhood or community of interest?
I'm considering my community more my neighborhood, right? Not,
Yes. Could be neighborhoods or communities of interest that are geographically defined.
Yeah, most of us are retired. We're an older group, retired.
Retired and older group.
Yes,
And where exactly is that?
on the west side of Peck.
West side of Peck?
West side of Santa Paula, of Peck, on Foothill, that
Okay.
area up there. And that's why I was a little confused with the map, because I saw Foothill, but then it cuts off. It doesn't, it doesn't go on. I wonder what happened to those homes there. Maybe I'm just not reading the map correctly. Yeah.
So what I'm pulling up here is the official general plan land use map from the city. And I first want to reference a point made earlier about April Lane, that is considered part of the city, so anything that is within this black line. And so there is that little piece just below April Lane that is not part of the city. And so if you scroll down here, you can see that you were referring to Peck,
Yes.
which is right here?
Yes.
Yeah, so
So,
anything that is within the black line is considered a part of city territory.
but if you go up, if you Foothill and Peck,
Foothill and Peck?
yeah, keep going up. There it is, all the way up the top. Yeah. Just easier by seeing your map that we have, there's Foothill right here.
Yes.
And that's am I missing something? Because there are homes here. I don't know what
So-
I'm studying.
According to the city plan, the area here is not within the city.
Okay, thank you.
I have kind of favored the number here, because as we start talking about where are the retired people, where are the people, the renters, where are the people with more money, people with less money, then again, I think we're dividing up, and it's actually, and I understand it's representation, but it's almost a form of discrimination, because then all of a sudden, you're the renter district, you're the old retired people over here. So I would prefer, I think, just doing contiguous numbers as I thought. The churches are definitely a part of the community, but it's a mixture of church and state, so I don't know how that's going to come out. So, but I would say there are a number of churches, and especially a lot of the way, and
Churches?
the number of churches that are.
Connie, I think maybe you could give definitions, because communities of interest is just that. So,
I draw the lines though, based on.
that's one of the requirements, yes.
So we're seeking feedback on communities of interest, so that way, when we are drawing those maps, we take that into consideration of what people value, and that can help you decide how you draw those lines.
Maybe I misunderstood them. I thought the primary, the red section that you spoke to earlier, the primary goal was to keep it contiguous. Because I did bring up the concept of members in my question. So I'm confused with the answers on that.
So you can see that under the state criteria, the goal is to adhere to all of them. They're all legal criteria, but the state recognizes there may be cases where it's not possible to adhere to all of them because of various trade-offs that have to be made. But the idea is to adhere to all of them, but if you have to make trade-offs, you prioritize the ones that are higher in the list. So contiguity would be the highest priority, then neighborhoods/communities of interest, then boundaries, then compactness.
I wanted to say that we have one of the best communities ever. One of the favorite places to go is take a walk down Main Street for the car show on the first Friday of the month. You would be amazed at how many people come from all over to our town to shop in our stores and to eat in our restaurants, from Camarillo and Ventura and Oxnard and all over, because I was campaigning. I said, are you from Santa Paula? I'm Judy Clement, vote for me for city council. So we have wonderful, wonderful events in this town. We have a library which has the 84th annual art show. It's the longest running art and photography show in Southern California. Also, little restaurants like La Cabana. Really great place to meet, sit on the patio, have a margarita, and a chili relleno. So we got the best.
Judy, what's your point on that?
What's my point? My point is we are a unified Santa Paula. I don't really agree with splitting it into divisions. You know,
So a community of interest are constituents from Thomas Aquinas College, all the teachers, families. They kind of filter down into the Oaks, up near the hospital, sort of that central region near McKevitt. That's kind of, they have a big homeschooling group. That's and then they have a small child campus in the center of town. But as an overall group, they're filtered throughout the Oaks, near the hospital, kind of McKevitt on up. And they tend to congregate sort of like Santa Paula on up, simply because of the way they commute.
Thank you. And can you repeat that last street so we can get that for the record?
So it's a big group of them that live on Santa Paula Street up towards like McKevitt Elementary School, then up towards TU Hospital, and then in the community of the Oaks. And not only the teachers and their families, but students, and I'm renting a house right now with 3 students, so it's a big group.
Awesome. Thank you for that input.
How did the school district divide up? What was their process? And does it make sense for us just to adopt that? I don't know enough about it. Judy, we don't have a choice. We don't have a choice.
we have to do this.
This map shows elementary school attendance areas, which are not to be confused with school district trustee areas. The trustee areas, I don't have that map available here, but this shows where students would which schools they would go to based on where they live. So that could be one. I believe that the school district decided how to draw these boundaries, but that is one possibility of conceiving of neighborhoods or communities of interest.
Hello, Gomez here. There is multiple communities of interest that I've talked to many people about. I am a community organizer in Santa Paula. One of them is renters communities of interest. Even if they live in houses, they still rent. There's been a lot of evictions lately, and it's not like we're segregating them or anything. It's to represent them and give them more support for renters. Another one is farm workers. Santa Paula has like 2 or more apartments that are focused for farm workers, and it's a huge benefit for them because it's a community that sticks together. And another one, just like low income would be another one, and I think that's it. These workshops are super informative. Class has been working with some leaders as well for a couple months already, and it takes a while, so all the questions that people are asking have been asked by multiple people already in our Santa Paula cause and in the town hall. We also have little trips that we go around the city coming up next Monday, so if you want to join us as well, we're going to go around Santa Paula and just looking at communities of interest as well. Thank you. I actually have a follow-up question on that. So for the communities of interest that you provided, do you have any geographical locations that would help us? For renters is downtown. Farm workers, although they are everywhere in our Santa Paula, they are mainly focused, well, like the renters and the renters where they're focused on farm workers is in Harvard and Santa Barbara. So they are different areas.
Santa Maria Street.
Santa Maria. And also by 12th Street as well for farm workers and renters.
May I ask a follow-up? So, given that renters tend to be concentrated, especially in the central part of the city, would this be a community of interest that would be better represented by trying to be as concentrated in one district as possible, or would it be better to distribute the renter population among several districts for more effective and fair representation?
I could be wrong on this one, but I think one district to represent the renters is important, maybe because we would have more representation with evictions and other stuff happening to renters.
I think also the commercial area, so Howell Drive, I'm looking at the map, there's not a lot of voters in that area, but it's still an important part of the economic viability of St. Paul. So anything around Howell, those businesses out there. And then probably development on the west end, I think there's some type of park, maybe we could build a commercial park on the west end. So I just put it in the commercial. I have a question on your very well stated comment. Basically, on the renters, let's say you've got renters in different parts of the city, at what point is that, do they have to be contiguous? That's kind of confused. How are you going to do that? Are you going to take the most, where the most renters are, where you're going?
Yes, so obviously renters are spread throughout the city. There are certain areas where they're more heavily concentrated. And so the idea is, for purposes of their effective and fair representation, would it be better if they were a very overwhelming majority of one district or a slim majority in multiple districts? And so that's one of the reasons we're here tonight, is to try to get that input from members of the community.
That's where I think you're in a typecasting, I mean, if that's what you want, that's okay, but I think it's you end up typecasting. Oh, Ellen Drive, yeah, and then on the east end. And that's where the development of the new hospital, I mean, that's another potential, I don't know, that's in the state of the town. So that's going to be where the commercial development is going on there.
That's Howland, as in H-A-L-A-N. Helen.
Alice.
Okay, thank you.
Where AR.
Pronunciation is key.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Hi. I'd like to just like offer specifics on these areas that kind of tie into the renters and low income and historically farm worker housing. Just the areas that I'm familiar with is the area that I currently live in, which is the condo, like dense area that we're in right now, which I consider to be from Santa Paula Street all the way until the freeway, west of Palm. So there's a lot of apartments and it's just higher density residential in this area. So I would like that to be considered a community. And then I would also like to advocate for the community that I grew up in, which I consider from Richmond Road down to Santa Paula Street, and to a certain extent from Santa Paula Street down kind of to the freeway as well. It's the Barbara Webster School District and the Grace Hill School District. And that would be east of Ojai Road, mostly, but neighboring.
Well, I know we already talked about it, it's always, but the Guadalupe Church for sure. And then the West End we already talked about too, so I feel like that looks looking pretty good. I just wanted to make sure that all the elementary school areas, I feel like the area around it, one note on that is I think that they're pretty equal when it comes to getting a good spread of our city, at least living here for the 14 years. So.
Well, the Eastern one is your dining room.
I just wanted to clarify for you, Manetta, you got commenting regarding the new Harvest development owned by or previously developed? Or are you referring to the Manetta that is on the west side of the county?
Both is fine.
Okay, but they're two different areas. So we should put them separately then?
Yeah, correct.
Okay, so the Harvest is what you meant?
The Harvest there.
And then Limonetta, I'm referring to Limonetta, the county, Limonetta, where the actual packing house and that is, that's outside the city. So, okay, that's what I meant. That's why I was trying to define what you meant. I really want to distinguish between higher income areas, the Oaks, Hillview Estates, and that should all be one area, and also part of the Harvest could be incorporated into that. Not Hillview Estates, I'm sorry. No, I'm talking about the hospital.
Oh, we're not.
No, not Hillview, what is, where Mary Ann Kelsey used to live.
Oh, like the Monte Vista.
Yes, that area, that neighborhood, it's called something in this, Hillsborough, sorry. Hillsborough Estates. That should be, I agree with the previous speaker that the area from, and I would cut it off at Bedford, going south to the freeway. And the eastern boundary would be Grant Line, rather. Western boundary would be Ojai Road. Another district going from the top, Hillsborough Estates, down to Santa Paula Street. The eastern boundary would be Ojai Road. The western boundary could be Steckel. it's all contiguous. It's all contiguous. And then another district could be from Steckel west to the end of the city limits, which would be let's see, that would be Beckwith, to include the mobile home park in Santa Paula West.
You're just dictating all the community.
I'm sorry, I think you have an opportunity, may I give my opinion?
It's like,
I've done my homework, so I'm just providing my input.
you're talking as if you're the entire city.
Thank you all for that great input. We have a very comprehensive list here,
I
and
did
we
not
are.
get to give all my input, I'm sorry, I want that on the record, and that was very rude. I would love to.
All right, well, I would like to note this is not the last opportunity to provide input. As you can see up on the board, we have 3 more workshops just like this for you all to participate and share your input. We also accept input through our online neighborhood survey that we really encourage you to fill out. So if you want to scan that QR code right now, I'll give you a moment to do that. This is where you can clearly define your neighborhoods and communities of interest that you think should be kept together in a single district. The next one is on October 6th, and it's going to be via Zoom, so virtual. Virtual meeting. And lastly, you can always submit your public comments and your maps to our email address, district@spcity.org, and our website always has the most up-to-date information.
Does the next meeting have an update on those, or what are your?
The next, so what we do with this is we take a photo of it, post it on the website, and encourage people to take a look at the community, or the feedback we've received from all community members. So that way, when you are drawing your maps, you're taking into consideration what your fellow constituents think. But this will be built on in the next workshop.
Thanks for your time, thanks for your presentation.
Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your evening.